All right, we're back with the Costello Coaching Podcast with my man Brad Boyer. Today is an exciting episode because we are going to dive into your training experience, what you did, how you think you could have approached it differently, what you learned from it. And Brad, to be honest, like when people turn these on and listen, and we learn from stories as human beings, we learn from stories. You think about the most popular book in the world that's given the most life lessons ever, the Bible. It's a book of stories, and we learn from stories. And so it's one way to approach this would be, hey, this is the best training modalities. Here's the research. Here's what you should be doing. Most people don't learn that way. Most people learn by hearing the stories of others and their experience. And you had a very successful career, obviously. But now that you're on the other side of it, mentoring, coaching, developing, you know what the most cutting edge training techniques are, whether it's skill specific or physical on the weight room side. And you had your own experiences. And the best way to learn is taking someone with experience who's been down that path and then to look back at your past self and say, how would I coach him now? What would I have told him to do? And then that helps the current players learn from that. And so the mission for today and the objective for today is to really dive into what you did, who impacted you along that journey, what coaches impacted you along that journey, and how you would go about it a little bit differently now. And I think people can learn so much from those stories. So without further ado, we'll dive right into it with Brad.
Yeah, Tommy, big thing for me going through my career, my journey, going through the high school, the college, and all these young kids are trying to navigate, obviously their dream of playing in the big leagues. And for me, when I was the most monumental part that changed me was obviously the physical, the power, the speed, the explosiveness. I always had it, but taking it to another level started in about 2006 when I was drafted by the Seattle Mariners. Sorry about that. I was drafted by the San Francisco Giants in 2006. The Mariners in 2005. But when 2006 hit, I really knew this was now my job. It was my dream, but it became my job now. And I knew like, okay, how am I going to take it to the next level? My agent introduced me to Marcus Elliott, a Harvard MD, who was up in Santa Barbara, just founded this performance-based biomechanics center called P3, Peak Performance Project. And this place was cutting edge. I mean, we were doing things that were ahead of the curve. A lot of it was Soviet-based training, but Marcus, it's the way he programmed and sequenced the movements and all that. So we were doing, when we were there, we had about 6 professional baseball players that kind of started this culture that became very contagious, competitive, passion around it. And Marcus was a genius at programming. He was, the way he sequenced things, we were doing big plyometrics, but it was big movements first, doing an Olympic lift or some sort of RDL or some sort of squat movement into a very unique plyometric. It was nervous-based training. And then we'd follow that with an isometric hold. So everything was circuit-based, but the movements had it was very specific. And, that was something that like that nervous system training started to change the biochemistry, change the way like I started feeling a different edge and a different explosiveness and a different understanding of what it takes to, to be something special at the high level. And Marcus, when we were there, I mean, there was force plate technology. I'm just out of college. I didn't know a thing about it. I see that you guys have that here and you're really on top of that. But the force plate technology was measuring ground angles, ballistic rotational force. We had Kaiser machines. Kaiser machine is something that is an air-based training thing that you use, and we were doing it on force plates and measuring our ground angles. And so that started, kind of being a light bulb. And that was something that being there really turned me on to that training part. Because when I was younger in high school, I played 3 sports. I never was really into, I didn't want to feel stiff. I didn't want to feel sore. I didn't understand really anything about training. There was obviously we didn't have any access to that. over the internet or any of these things we do today. So I was basically just going to the gym, like it was called LA workout. I was going with my buddies, just, trying to look good, do some core, really trying to put on some size with the chest, but I wasn't doing any pulling or any shoulder work. And I noticed from there, like, man, I don't like this. I'm kind of stiff. I'm sore. My arm, I'm not feeling the same. Went to college, and that's where, you really hit the weight room, but I still wasn't intrigued by it. I kind of half-assed the workouts. My skill set was there. My athleticism was still there for me to really kind of, be able to compete. But it wasn't until 2006 when Marcus Elliott, and this guy, man, he worked for the New England Patriots when Tom Brady was there in '99. He worked at the U.S. Olympic Training Center. He was a head research and biomechanics expert. So I was introduced to this by my agent. And that's kind of where, from 2006 to 2015, is what I really locked in on.
I want to go into Marcus a little bit.
Yeah.
I've never met him, but obviously heard a lot about him. He's had so many disciples come from, his way of thinking. What a, innovator in the space, right? To think 20 years ago, this guy was doing force plates, like pretty common now at a higher level of training, but not like super common, you know what I mean? To have force plates now and like the access to data and technology, like way ahead of the curve. Pretty transformative in the space.
Yeah.
But what actually intrigues me more is not so much, we can get into the data that you learned and the force and all that stuff, but what I'm hearing is like this guy changed your habits in your life. Like you are a person who loves training now. You go over to, you train with my mentor, Ryan Sorensen. You work out with a great group over there, and they have an incredible gym and a great culture. And that's something you do on a weekly, 3-4 times a week. That's like ingrained in you. And it seems like up until 2006, you were almost like trying to separate from it. Like you didn't want it. But Marcus had this ability to really change your life in the way that you approach training. So what was he like in terms of personality? Because he had the ability to build a culture. Obviously, he had the credibility. Like you said, Harvard, Patriots, Olympic Center, and he was doing this cutting edge stuff. But what was Marcus like as a person?
Yeah, Marcus was, when you first met Marcus, he was a very likable guy, very positive. He would, first thing when you came in the building, and I'm a young 22-year-old kid coming in there, and he just made you feel special, made you feel like a special athlete. Yes, I had some great athleticism, but Marcus, he even brought more out of you. He had this way of getting you to come in every day and put on your best. Because we know some days, Tommy, when we wake up, our body doesn't feel as good. We're maybe not as motivated. But as soon as you walked in that building, I mean, you had the music on, you had Jay-Z or T.I. Like Marcus was big into like, he was this Harvard guy, but loved rap music. And he had this place blasting. We were in an industrial center next to all these little small surf shops in Santa Barbara, close to State Street. And as soon as you walked in that building, it was on. There was just something, there was an aura. He had every guy like on their A game. So we were competing against each other at the same time. And he knew how to, bring out that best competitive edge. And he was very, when I say very likable, I mean, obviously he spoke at a higher level his lexicon was on another level. It was such a cerebral guy. I mean, some of the things that came out of his mouth, you might not understand at times, till I'd have to go back home and kind of look it up and say, oh, what was he talking about on ground angles or this? But forget the science part. He made you feel like you were the dude in there. And that's something, I see with the culture being created in here. You have force plate technology, the science, but the guys come in and there's passion, there's joy. Guys when they get out of practice, they want to be here. They want to be around you. And what was something for you? Like, was that something you wanted to, when you were coming up with this, Costello coaching, is that something you wanted to create Was it about the environment and obviously building the kid up? There was a lot of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking. I think like as I'm hearing that, like, yeah, I think the data gets people in the door and provides habit change, because as a competitor, you want to change your data, you want to improve, you want to get better, you want to move the needle, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's what I tell kids is like the beautiful part about training is inputs equal outputs, and nothing else really in our life inputs equal outputs. Like we can try as hard as we can within relationships. We can try as hard as we can within sport. We can try as hard as we can within business. But training is the one thing where if you do this, you eat this, you recover like this, you will get this, because there's enough data to back that. So when you grab the data on the front end, it allows for someone to be connected to their habit change. And so I think what ends up happening is like when you start improving and you start making your life better, it's addicting. And you're working towards something. And so when you get a group of people that are bought in on the same philosophy, and they're all striving towards being their best self, and then they get to show up in a place to do that together, then the environment is built like that. So an environment, I think, is built from each individual's energy being a collective, together creates that positive environment. And so it really comes down to just coaching each individual towards, whatever their path towards their best is, rather than like, putting a leaderboard up and saying this is the best. Because I think what happens is like that could create like a negative culture, like this is our standard of excellence and like he's our best guy. It's never about that. Like if you're on JV or you're a first rounder, that's okay. Like the first rounder is working towards his potential and the JV player is working towards his potential, and that's okay. Like that builds a good environment. And then they all support each other along each other's journey. So I think, to kind of answer your question, I think that's why the kids show up so excited to get in here. And it is a process where they finish practice and they're firing up here, working out in their baseball pants, like doing whatever they can to, do it.
Yeah. I mean, you see a lot of these guys, I feel like it's an outlet that gets their mind off of, there's a lot of pressure in what we're going through. Some of these young kids with so much that's around them now, that this is an outlet this is a community to come in here and to be yourself, to own your own personality. And there's no, like, you're not under the microscope. And that's something what's really special. And that's something that I feel when I come in here, and what I felt when I went up to P3 is Marcus made you feel. I wasn't, Barry Zito, who was a $175 million pitcher, or Carlos Quentin, who was, like a $70 million player with the White Sox. I was a young minor leaguer grinding and struggling, and Marcus made you feel like, he didn't make you feel like, oh, your force plate data is not at this number. He's like, Brad, I love these numbers, man. Let's keep getting after it. Like, I mean, what you're doing in here and your commitment, and it was all about commitment. And he sold you on the commitment. And I think that's something, you really hit on.
Yeah. I mean, I actually had a parent ironically say to me like something, and I was like, wow, I learned about myself. He's like, yeah, I learned that when we're committed to you, like you're more responsive to us. And I was like, yeah, because I don't waste my time with one-off questions. Like I'm not just an answering machine. I'm not ChatGPT. Like, you can't just plug questions into me and I answer them for everyone. I don't have enough bandwidth to do that. But if you're committed to me and you need 10 minutes on the phone, and we've been grinding for 4 to 5 months, of course, like I'm going to get on the phone and help you. But like, you can't show up here and there and, ask for, my commitment to you if you're not committed to me. Relationships are two-way streets. And it seems like Marcus gave you everything he had because you were giving him everything you had.
Yeah. He was always, now going back, he when you came in, you left, he's like, oh, I'm seeing you tomorrow, right? it was all about commitment. Now, it was, look, the training it was pricey. This wasn't just like, you show up to, some 24-hour fitness and pay a trainer. Like, it was pricey. That we're talking, $150 per athlete at the time, 10 guys in the building. I'm a struggling minor leaguer, I was, but it's the investment in yourself, and it's the ROI you're going to get back from that. It's like,
so 2006, 150. So that would be like today, 300 ahead almost.
Yeah.
250 ahead.
Yeah. You weren't thinking about like, you were like, this guy's killing it. But you weren't like, you didn't feel resentful. You weren't getting ripped off at all because the passion that was behind Marcus. And Marcus had other guys there. He had a Stanford R&D guy there. That was this young kid fresh out of Stanford that was, really made you feel and understand your data, and you were just intrigued by it. He had a guy, Woody Clifford, that runs Sports West. That Woody had a lot of time playing in the minor leagues, and was understanding the training part and understanding like what it takes and how this transitions into the baseball, like into the season. He had another guy, Phil Wagner, he runs Sparta up in the Stanford area now. And so he had all these really smart minds. But with these smart minds, they had personality. And you came in there and you were like, all right, I'm going to be broke. I'm going to go out, play the minor league season, and I come back, I'm already in debt. But you were looking at this as a long-term investment, and long-term play. Even if you don't make the big leagues, and I was close, it was the journey of going there. The memories I built, even though like the price of this, it's something why I'm here. I'm able to talk to you, and I'm here to give back to kids today and have them understand what commitment and what it takes. And that's what was special.
That's awesome. Is there anything you would have approached differently?
Yeah. So going through this journey, going through the professional journey, I was, when you get into a culture and you're driving up along the beach of Santa Barbara, it was such a good, positive vibe. I was so addicted to speed, power, explosiveness, and just getting up there and being around the guys that afterwards, I didn't spend enough time on the skill acquisition part. I just was like, in my head, I have the edge. I'm doing things that other guys aren't, which is true, but it needs to transition into the baseball thing. I was a solid player, but I probably took, before I went to spring training, I took ground balls maybe 5 times, turned the double play 5 times. That was something for me. I needed to master the double play turn or master being a shortstop. I was a solid shortstop in high school, but when you get to the big league level, there's a different tune up there. The way guys move, the way guys can throw from different angles. And I think if I would have taken an approach like how Jack Wilson does, and I remember talking to Jack, and Jack spent about 2 days in the weight room and then 4 days on ground balls. That was his conditioning for an hour. He'd go nonstop and maybe, with a 15-minute break. So he was conditioning himself with the skill and double plays and throwing on the run. And those things right there are what transitioned into the game. So and also I was hitting flips. It was a flipped based off season. I was working mechanics off a flip, not a game like environment. And I would work these mechanics and show up in spring training. I'm like, shit, like first round of BP and I'm putting the ball in the turtle, I'm like, all right, this is going to be a great spring training or a great year. So I think I needed to I was training the right stuff on the hitting stuff. I just wasn't doing it more in game like environment. I didn't know, or the fielding stuff. I was fast. I could hit, but if I would have trained to be a really strong fielder, I could be a great super utility somewhere. So
yeah, that's kind of what you learn, like looking back at it, which is interesting. Most guys kind of look actually back at their career and they'll be like, oh, I didn't do enough on the training end, but you had access to this like guy who was literally 20 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And so you're this, you develop this power and strength and speed that you had never had in your career. But going back to when you're younger, you had great skill coaching. You had baseball minds at 10 years old. I remember you telling me this. You had baseball minds at 10 years old, helping you learn how to turn double plays, how to do first and thirds, how to hold runners at a young age. So your skill got really ahead of the curve, which got you in the door. Then you probably felt like, man, I'm not strong enough. I need to catch up on it. And then what ends up happening is the environment is so fun and so addicting. You get strong enough, and it's almost like distracting in a way, because we're up in Santa Barbara, we hang out, and I feel like I'm getting better, and I know I'm getting better, and I'm putting in hard work, but I'm not actually focused on the bottom line of this business, which is, no matter how strong I am, no matter how fat I am, no matter how skinny I am, if I'm hitting 330, turning double plays, I'm getting paid.
Yeah. That's, as I look back and reflect back, I go to spring training. I look at certain guys that, man, I was outperforming them on all the training based tests. I mean, not even close. But you're looking at a guy like Pablo Sandoval, who, the Kung Fu Panda. That guy's maybe did a little bit of training, but he's out playing like, in the Winter League, or he's out. I mean, he comes to spring training, and his skill at his size, he wasn't in shape, but his hand-eye coordination, his ability to catch and throw and from different arm angles was on another level.
So what's the balance then? What's the balance? Just off the cuff, what's the perfect schedule for someone who has an off season? So if you're in high school and you have an off season, or if you're in college, you really never get an off season. If you're in pros, you get an off season. What is the perfect schedule?
Yeah, if we're looking right now just on development for the high school, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, you got to really spend time in the weight room. The speed and the explosiveness. I mean, we all know that hitting the ball harder is something that is that you have to train, unless you're just, a Quentin Young, and he was even training it. But you got to be able to be explosive. You got to be able to have power, and speed, and be able to throw harder, and so the development side in the summers when you're young, yes, you got to work on your skill. But work on your skill, but put your time on the speed and the power and all that, instead of playing so many tournaments. Go out and play some games just to get some feel and be with your buddies, or go out and play a couple perfect game tournaments, but not every weekend, or not. You got to be in here, getting your that physical part, at the next level. As you get to college, still there, if you're a physical specimen, you really need to put work in on the actual skill acquisition part. Maybe you're a pitcher that already has a power arm, but you need to really lock in on different pitch shapes and different, how to attack a hitter. On the hitting side, I would say, yes, we got to really attack, the bat path is key. You need to have a bat path that's adjustable. You got to still maintain your strength and power, but maybe, what's the balance? Well, it depends on some months. Put in 4 days to 5 days of training. Then in other months, let's take it back to 3 days a week and train more on the skill acquisition part. And as you get to pro ball, well, what do we need? We need to assess. That's why I have some great technology and these great tools. Okay, he needs better ankle mobility, better hip mobility, or we need to rev the engine up. So trying to, really hone in on what the individual needs. And that's kind of what I try to assess and kind of mentor the players. Hey man, we got to get you better on, hip mobility or better explosiveness, or hey, we got to train you hitting the curveball or hitting velocity.
I think why we replicate so much success for so many people is because usually athletes feel isolated with their mentors. And what I mean by that is they are really connected with their strength guy. They're really connected with their hitting guy. They're really connected with their, baseball coach. But the reality is it needs to be a holistic group that's all connected. And so, the hitting guy and the strength guy and the pitching guy, those were all kind of the same guys, me, or me and Jagger, or me and you. But we're all connected on what the athlete needs. It's hey, T, this hitter, struggling with this in the box. Can you hit that in the weight room with him? Yeah. Whereas I could be the best weight room guy ever, but if I'm not connecting it to the skill, then, what's the point?
And that's where the communication of being in this environment, and being around you and Jagger and, having, the mental coach here is we can, collaborate and see, because you're watching a guy move, you're watching, and then you come in there and watch, is it transitioning? Is it this? Like, does this guy need to have better emotional regulation on the mental side? Why is it not transitioning to these big numbers in the game? And that's where we're able to, or is he getting injured and he's having great performance, but he's just prone to injury. We're able in this environment to assess the situation. And I think the communication is key and makes it special.
The round table is unique, having a round table, having inputs. And like, I always felt like my training was like in my career was a little disconnected from what the skill was. Like I was moving the needle. I remember so much like at Proactive, like the one summer, 2018, incredible training, the best, like felt the best. My body was in incredible shape. Ryan just trained me
to another level.
I can't even explain it, how good it was. But I remember like assuming that the velocity would change. And I was still throwing, the same velocity, even though I got so much better in the weight room and so much better shape and condition. So it became like, okay, what was that? What was the missing link? And for me, I think it was more of like a biomechanical deficiency. So like, but never really having like that right, eye on me to adjust the biomechanics of the way I needed to throw. I think that was my missing link. So when the kids come in and do the assessment with me, it's like really intuitive to the fact of we got to look at everything. We got to look at the health. We got to look at the structure of the shoulder. We got to look at the force plates. We got to look at their biomechanics. We got to look at their mental, emotional, and then be like, okay, this is the lowest hanging fruit. I think this is where it's lacking. This is where it's connected. And then the needle moves,
Yeah. And that makes me think of, going now to my career, and man, I was fast. I was explosive. I was strong, but then I show up and why am I only hitting like 4 or 5 homers a year? Yeah, I'm hitting some doubles. I'm showing off and I'm in BP and I'm putting on a show in BP. That powers, but I know what's coming, right? So it's going back to, working on like game-like environments to see if that power is transitioning over. And I wasn't working on that. It was just flip-based. But all this power and rotational stuff, as I put a bat in my hand, I wasn't creating the same biomechanics. There was inefficiency. So I don't know if that was more of a body awareness thing or some sort of sequencing part, because something was off that it didn't transition.
I think it was a lack of repetitions of the skill. So like I think back to Jack Wilson is so good because the skill is so repped out. Like you said, I went to his house when he was still playing and I would play first base for him, and he'd turn on the Fungo Man, and the Fungo Man was loaded up with 350 baseballs. And that Fungo Man would just spit ground balls, and I'd fill up like 5 buckets, and he would just nonstop fielding ground balls. I'd catch, put them in the bucket, catch, put them in the bucket, and then go fill up the Fungo Man, and we'd just keep going. And the Fungo Man, he'd put on a cycle of like 13 different ground balls, and it had different hops, different reads, and he would just rep it out for hours. And the warm up was like tennis, and the or one-on-one basketball or pickleball, like as we got older and like Jack and Jacob were training with him. My point is like the myelin is developed when you have high repetitions and high volume, and so he was doing that, which was the most important thing. Like his skill is what is the value that you bring to the marketplace.
Yeah. He was basically on autopilot when you were watching him, and he was doing jump spin throws, throwing on different angles. Was he working on that stuff?
Yeah, but it was like all out of fun. It was like, how fun could this be if I made this play? It was creative, it was imagination. And when you really understand the science of it, like what's funny is like there's like levels to it, right? So Jack isn't going to be the type of person that's going to come and break down the science of the angular force, and like that's not his personality. Where you go get in the lab with these science guys and you listen to them and you go, wow, these guys are so smart at what they're doing, and they are, and they're genius, and it's beautiful, and it's so good. And then you go out and you watch like a guy like Jack take ground balls, and you see him, rep this stuff out, and you go, wow, that's not science at all. That's not science-backed training. There's no tracking. There's no metrics. There's no performance. If you really read and understand the literature, you'd understand actually what he was doing was way better and way more beneficial on a science end to what he was trying to achieve. Because the way his brain had to process, like I mentioned, the myelin, like the way his nervous system was firing, the repetitions he was getting, the way he was able to process, like cognitive processing, spatial awareness. These are all the skills that are necessary for you to achieve high success in baseball, specifically.
It goes back to, a book I read, Outliers, the 10,000 hour rule. Jack already mastered that probably by the time he was, 21, 12. Right? Or 12. Yeah. So this was something that, Jack made his money as an elite shortstop, and he did have a year or two where he hit, but being an elite shortstop, being able, those reps in the backyard, that kid-like environment, people might say, oh, that's not serious enough training. But really what you said is he was training the myelin. He was in that 10,000 hour rule, created that.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And like, you don't realize it while, I got to witness it and be around it all the time. But not until I like understood the science of it and understood the training, how good that was.
Yeah.
But that kind of brings me like, I think Jack, like indirectly, he was never my coach. I mean, I coached under him at Thousand Oaks High School as the JV coach. And I learned from him, I think, the most like about coaching, where he doesn't even know that. But I think I learned the most about coaching baseball, coaching humans from him. Like there was this structure, there was this sturdiness, there was this edge and standard, but also this creativity and exposure and to letting these kids like learn how to be creative and play.
And what Jack's basically doing is that's what you see in the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Mexico, these international places, Japan, Korea. I mean, there's serious discipline overseas on what, especially in Japan, the way they work on their skill. I mean, they put so much time in. And then you look at like the creativity aspect of the Latin players, and you see it in the World Baseball Classic. These guys are playing in a game like it's, like I said, like it's wiffle ball, or how Jack is in his backyard. And that's something that kind of sometimes hit home. I was like, wow, am I working enough on that part of my game? Or, what should I be doing? So I was always a little confused on what I needed to do.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, did you do 10 reps, and did you do this training block, and did you hit this quota, and did you hit this standard? It could just be like, are you being active in the space? You know what I mean? Like, Are you being active in baseball? Are you being active there? But yeah, I think that is like really important to realize, and can give kids insights that it's okay to go play. It's okay to go play. It's okay to go do that. But like, it's not about going to play at a perfect game tournament where you have to go there to improve your ranking. That's not what I'm saying. Like, you can go play a bunch of games, but you got to be getting the weight room work in, and it's time allocation and making sure that you're having fun with it, and it's not a job. Like, I think too, what happens when you play professional baseball is like, it's a job, and so it becomes a job. Yeah. And then that inherently, you lose the creativity and you lose the freedom of expression with it.
Yeah, I think there's some sort of like maybe doubt in your mind. Am I checking all the boxes? And if I'm doing this fun creativity stuff, well, I'm a pro. I need to take this more seriously. But in reality, that it's
not like that.
Yeah, it's not like that. And
but you don't realize that when you're playing.
No. And
I think you do now. I think I do now.
Big time.
Yeah,
big
but
time.
I took it way too serious. Like, and it wasn't a bad thing. When I say take it too serious, it wasn't a bad thing that I took it so serious, because I put in all the work. But like, the work was about doing the work. It wasn't about like having, enjoying it. It was more so like, oh, I have to do this. I have to check the box.
Yeah, you were disciplined, man. You were committed, so you got to give yourself credit to that. I just think it was, you have this type A personality of how like, man, I gotta be this, and this. This is my sleep, which is important. I got to get this training, my breath work, maybe, but you weren't really maybe thinking outside the box and maybe, have a little fun with when I'm throwing, like just, go and throw to a net and just work on like nasty pitches and feel like you're facing some big leaguer in the game and how you're going to pitch to him and sequence him.
Yeah. And that can be credited as, improving, getting better. Like, I think what happens is when people go out and have fun with it, they don't like stack it in their mind as like, oh, I put in work today. They if they were frustrated and it was hard and it was a challenging day and it was like, then it's put in their mind that they put in work. The same thing goes with like training with people in the, everyday people, and not to get off topic, but it kind of happens in the training world where if you don't go redline in the gym and sweat and go as hard as you can and feel gassed, like people feel like they didn't put in work. Whereas like a nice easy walk on a recovery day could have been the best thing for your body. The same thing for an athlete, like a nice, fun, relaxing day where you're going to practice a skill could be chalked up as a positive improvement day.
Like I always say, you don't need your dad or a coach. When you're at your house, there's a wall. You can throw a racquetball, a tennis ball. You can do those little unique things to work on your hands and your double play feel, or just playing catch to a wall, or, I'm going to go back to Manny Ramirez when Manny was in high school. And Manny told me, Manny was actually like, they had him as like his coach told him his sophomore year, you're going to be a PO. Manny Ramirez. This is going back. And then Manny.
Isn't he from Brooklyn?
Yeah, Manny's from Brooklyn. Yeah, in New York. And he would go to some random park, in New York where there was a field, and he would throw the ball up to himself and see how many times he could hit it out to dead center. And that right there, he was just having fun, but it was actually working on some cool things. It was making him, when you throw a ball up, it's a lot. I mean, it is hard still to hit the ball out. And he was training to hit the ball out to center field. He was training not to roll over, but just being on your own and doing that, or throwing the ball against the wall, you start to develop a sense of feel. You start to develop a sense of joy for the game. But really, it's like you are working on your skill.
Wouldn't that be incredible if like you told a parent, yeah, go drop your kid off at the park for 6 months by himself and like see how much better he gets at baseball? Is he going to find a way to do it? And then it would be like a great tell if he really loves the game.
Yeah, don't let him take his cell phone either,
Just be scrolling TikTok, Snapchatting.
Yeah. Leave the phone in the car. Let's see if he can spend an hour or two each day just using his imagination. I think there'd be a lot of benefit there.
Yeah, in a age where ChatGPT gives you all the answers, and YouTube tells you every drill you should do.
Yep.
And Instagram clouds your brain. That might be the healthiest thing for someone.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today, man. There was a lot of insights and lots of things to learn. So thank you for sharing the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy.